Gotta love Moscow. Go to a little park just along the side of the road, and there's a nice big old rocket in the background. Anyway, Moscow American here. I was wanting to weigh in on the big news about the Putin-Trump summit. Obviously, since I live here in Moscow, follow the news and all, I'm very interested in knowing how this is all going to play out. So I wanted to share some analysis, some thoughts, maybe some slight predictions, maybe not predictions, ideas on different ways this might play out. So yeah, start with kind of just need to discuss the context a little bit, the recent background that got us here. So for anyone not really following the military operations and all, the Russian military has been making its, it's never in a rush, but it's been making its general progressive advances. And so in the south, if you're kind of imagining through your map of Ukraine, so this Donbass area, so sort of this area, kind of the southeastern, kind of that portion down there at the bottom side, right? That area is more urbanized, built up, but so there's defense lines there that were being built there all the way for years. Once you get past that region, it's much more open land, much more an open straight shot all the way to Kiev, so it is not nearly as easily defendable. So that area there's been a lot of pressure pushing further and further in. A lot of these defensive lines are kind of stretched very thin, and so Pokrov's one of the cities there, sort of one of the main linchpin cities on this defensive line, is coming under a lot of pressure, and it's looking like it's probably going to fall. All right, you're thinking kind of almost World War I trench warfare type thinking, right? These defensive lines might be hard to break through, but when they do, they can cause a big collapse. And in general, military situation looks like it might be closer to a collapse every day. Even Western outlets are starting to admit this. And Pokrovsk being such a major city in this whole southern section of the war, its fall could be catastrophic. It could be connected to a larger collapse in general. So, military situation there. Trump, meanwhile, right, he's kind of gotten himself in a weird situation, right? He doesn't want to involve the U.S. more than he has to, but we're still involved. He's aware, obviously, that this type of collapse might be a possibility, so he gave himself this sort of 50-day deadline, but then kind of put himself on the clock, requiring himself to kind of have some sort of results. I think probably reality struck that 50 days is a long time. With Pokrovsk looking like it might collapse, it might collapse in a few weeks, and then all of a sudden, before the 50 days is up, you're having a crisis in the entire military situation. And Trump is looking like he might inherit his own Afghanistan, but maybe a lot worse, right? So he adjusts to his 10-day deadline, right? Russia better agree to some sort of ceasefire or else. But he was also aware he didn't really have much to work with there. So in the end, he kind of just boxed himself in, right? Why would they agree to a ceasefire when they're about to break through, when they're winning? And a ceasefire that might put them in the position of disadvantage where Ukraine will rearm, right? So Trump boxes himself in, gives himself basically a deadline that he now has to work around. Okay, so he needs to come up with a result. And to be honest, on the Russian side, there's probably not a massive desire or need to have some sort of talk with Trump, to be honest, right? And we see this when Trump tries to send Witkoff to meet with Putin the first time. It gets delayed. Trump seems angry because from all the reports, it seems like Putin just wouldn't make the time to meet with Witkoff, right? Didn't seem like it was high a priority, right? In the here and now, priority is military breakthrough and everything going their way. Now, Putin being more of a strategic thinker, he probably did start thinking, okay, long term, there might be something out of this. So, Trump needs a way out of his boxed-in situation. One, the defeat in Ukraine, doesn't want that to be blamed on him if it happens soon. And two, his own deadline. So he has all this reason to try and have this meeting negotiate. Putin, not as much, but if he's thinking long-term, it might be worth it to have a better relationship with Trump. Okay, so we get on to the meeting itself, right? Meeting in Alaska. As everyone's pointed out, yes, Alaska used to belong to Russia, so there's maybe some symbolism there. I also looked at some analysis that was pointing out, Trump is focusing on Greenland, trying to get some more control over Canada. Seems like Trump's strategic thinking is shifted more towards the Arctic region, so maybe it's also sort of indicative of the future planning and thinking of where things are going to go. Also makes sense from a Russian perspective. They can keep Putin inside Russian airspace for the maximum amount of time. But I also read some analysis that made a good point. If Trump is desperately hoping for something to add to his push for the Nobel Peace Prize and to look at himself as the great deal maker, right? That's what he thinks of himself, right? Art of the deal, all that stuff. It also makes sense to have it on U.S. territory where you can cut out the intermediaries, right? You can't have Erdogan host it in Turkey and then come along and claim it was all his doing, right? So, might indicate that Trump is hoping for something big out of this that'll make him look good. So, as far as the actual meeting itself, what's probably going to go down? Well, Vance has been making the rounds, saying, they're hoping for... they're not the most optimistic, right? They're hoping for maybe some sort of freeze along the line of contact and sort of land exchange. Now, the problem is, land exchange, what does that even mean, right? I'm seeing a lot of stories pop out in Western media say, well, there's these 4 regions, so imagine Ukraine, so once again, the southeast area, where we're looking at that breakthrough, and the area that Russia voted, well, these areas that voted to become part of Russia are now legally recognized by the Russian Constitution as part of Russia, right? These 4 regions. I'm seeing stories out there claiming, well, they could give Russia Donetsk and Lugansk, but maybe in swap they could get back Zaporozhye and Kherson. No, something like this, absolutely, there's no way that they would be able to agree to this, because 1, it's legally recognized by Russian law now, and 2, this would look like a massive defeat. I was reading in Rydovka, it's a very pro-Russian news source today, and they were basically having a cow say, it's like, you realize Donetsk and Lugansk have been almost completely captured, whereas Zaporozhye and Kherson are already like 70, 65, 60% captured each of them. Why on earth would we agree to just give you a place we've already captured over half of in exchange for you pulling back out of a place we've almost completely pushed you out of as well? And we're winning on all fronts anyway. Like, how would any of that make sense? So, anything less than the 4 regions, I don't think, there's not a snowflake's chance in the Sahara Desert that Putin would agree to that. Anything less than those 4 regions plus Crimea, and no NATO, no EU. Okay, so I'm not certain that Trump and Vance are going in with a realistic view of how things are going to fall out, right? Frozen along the line of contact. Potentially, if any of these theorizing type rumors that are happening in Western media are true, trying to ask for something where they give back 2 of the regions and have the other 2. No, there's no way. So how's it going to play out? Probably, Trump could get angry. He could go in having these expectations, and then doesn't work out, gets angry. We end back in the situation we're at now, continuing on through a military solution, and Trump probably waffling back and forth, stuck because he's doesn't want to be have it hung on him as his Afghanistan, but also that he's promised to not get more involved. So probably more of the same. This back and forth. One day we're going to give him weapons, the next day we're not. It could go down that way. Putin could come in and be very maximalist, but I don't think so. I actually think probably the most likely thing is Putin's going to come in and say, 4 regions, right? Already recognized them. We've basically completely captured 2 of them. We're well along the way the other 2. And maybe in exchange, something like Sumy, Kharkov, right, will pull back in the north. It's possible. And then no EU, no NATO, right? So basically, the Istanbul Agreement all over again, but throw in the 4 regions, right? Because extra couple of years of fighting, taking ground, all this kind of stuff. I think that's probably the most likely thing. Now, here's the thing. He can't really ask less than that because public opinion, I think, in Russia would have a cow over that, right? I talk to people, interact with people, that comes up, right? Most people, to be honest, life here in somewhere like Moscow is just continuing on the same, other than its prices going higher. People are willing to support it, but I do think people would be outraged if it seemed like they were handing what would be a defeat to Russia. And if you back down from any of those 4 regions, it's going to be this massive defeat, I think, in their mind. And contrary to what the West may think, this is a country with, there's public opinion. There are, even within, like, Putin's own party, see all that, there are different prominent people. There's prominent people within the government, right? Even if he's not wanting to get reelected, he can't go and just flaunt all of that, back down, and do something ridiculous, right? And he's out for a win for his country, so there's no way I could see him doing that. But the maximalist approach of going in and saying, okay, get rid of Zelensky, 4 regions, throw in Kharkov, maybe Odessa, something like that, I don't think so. I think he's actually going to come in very moderate and basically Istanbul plus, right? That's the Istanbul agreements from the very beginning of the war, right? No NATO, recognize Crimea, that kind of stuff, with the addition of these 4 regions. But maybe the possibility of pulling out in the north, with there being a certain strategy behind this. Okay. That's what I'm kind of thinking at the base level. Now, will Trump take this? I actually think there's a good possibility he might, because it might be able to be presented as sort of the last chance before a big military collapse. They'll get hung on him. And he could still come out saying, well, he made a big deal. He found a way through, right? Helped save Ukraine, etc. Okay. Now, a lot of people in Russia wouldn't exactly be happy with this. Might seem like, well, we had a lot more victory in our grasp. Yeah, I don't think that necessarily matters as much, because I think my suspicion is now if we kind of turn to what's actually going to happen, right? Zelensky's not going to agree to it. The EU is going to keep promising that they'll support him, and which they can't, but they'll keep promising. He won't support it. The nationalists will flip a gasket, right? And it's not going to work out. So my suspicion is either Trump will get angry, throw it out, and we're back where we are now, or he'll take it. I actually lean towards him potentially being talked into taking it. Alaska's far from all the neocon influence and all. He might be in a situation where he's kind of making his own decisions a little bit more independently and wanting a deal. And he might then decide, oh, this actually is a good deal. Now, if he does take it, there is the possibility of a miracle that Zelensky wakes up one morning and goes, you know what? Let's stop the killing. I think that's almost a no-go right from the get-go. So probably it'll be a no, and then you end up in this situation where Trump is ticked off at Zelensky, says, I've found this deal, right? Zelensky's already going out there saying no to territorial concessions at all. The meeting even hasn't even happened yet, right? He's already saying none at all. Okay, he'll tick off Trump. This actually in some ways will give Trump the justification to say, I'm out. It was your fault, not my fault. Okay. I think that's probably the most likely outcome. Another outcome I think is probably second most likely is Trump makes the deal, comes back to Washington, gets guilted by the neocons and everyone else, and then kind of slowly starts backing off, and we end up sort of in the situation we're in now, where he keeps waffling back and forth on support, no support, but potentially has had more of a falling out now with Zelensky, because Zelensky's going to flip a fit anyway, and so it still kind of ends up with less American support than there would have been either way. So I want to quickly also point out then what I think is actually probably the most likely strategy from President Putin in this situation will be to potentially go in, right? Give something reasonable to Trump. I suspect 4 regions, no NATO, no EU at this point, but it's something reasonable. It's reasonable enough that on the miracle chance that it gets acted on, it's still a Russian victory. or at least at bare minimum, it's not a defeat. It's still a victory. But at the same time, it's also reasonable, so there's a likelihood that Trump might be able to be talked into taking it. But it's not acceptable to the radicals in Ukraine. They're going to say no, probably, in all likelihood. In which case, he gets to continue on. The forces get to continue on with the operation to achieve all the goals in the end. Absolute victory. But now you potentially have Trump kind of politically paralyzed, or he's not going to now want to up the support. He'll be out. He'll back down a bit more. You might even create more discontent with the angry little guy in the green t-shirt in Kiev, right? And potentially make it more likely for there to be some sort of resistance against him, maybe some change of government, right? So best case scenario then, or I'm guessing the strategy going in will be presented as giving Trump one last chance, give terms that are reasonable and good enough that, or that if they were taken, it won't be the end of the world for Russia, but bad enough for Ukraine. Let's be honest, they're probably not going to take them. It's not going to be giving them what they want. It's not giving them a freeze or a Minsk II where they can just rearm and pick back up in a few years, right? That's a no-go, right? That would be political suicide for Vladimir Putin, right? So offer something is still a victory. It's still achieving a big part of what they were looking for. So off chance if it's taken, it won't be the end of the world. Make sure it's something, though, still that is pushing Russia's interests to the point that Zelensky's not going to take it anyway. Carry on with the operation, and now you might have the U.S. given a chance to be kind of out of this thing. To be honest, for Trump, it could also be his best case scenario, right? He makes this big deal. He can go onto the news, say, I did everything it took to end this, this biggest war we've had since, I don't know, World War II, whatever, big, large scale, whatever, and make a victory lap with it. Zelensky burns it down. They're already sick of Zelensky anyway, so they can either try and regime change him or blame it all on him and give him the freedom to jump out. Now, Trump goes back and forth so much, I don't even want to predict if he'll actually stick with that, but I do think it's possible he might see that as a way out. Either way, it might be worth the bet for President Putin on his side of things. Because, let's be honest, there's going to be a time when this war is over, and it will be good to have the groundwork set for better relations with the U.S. at some point in the distant future. It might be with his successor, it might be a long ways out, but it still is logical, and it's still worth it. So, yeah, I don't think he's wanting to think just in terms of tomorrow. He's wanting a victory, but he's also wanting to set up for the future, for future stability, all that kind of stuff, security. So, we'll wait and see. I'm sure there's other options on which way this could go. And with Trump in the mix, nothing is ever boring. There's always the unexpected, so I expect the unexpected. So, let me know in the comments if there's any other ways this is going to go down that you see. Maybe I feel like I should try and find a way to try to place some bets on this or something. But anyway, please like, comment, and subscribe, and y'all have a good day.